So welcome to the first of a four-part series. As I said, the packet that you have in front of you is quite hefty. We will not be doing everything today. This is for the next 4 weeks. If we finish early, the last week I have some new sources to bring, but this may in fact suffice for our 4 hours together. The title is Tikkun Olam, Making Our World Stable. I believe the title in the adult ed was a little bit different. I might have had the word Tzelem Elokim. You'll see that for me those two notions are really connected. Tikkun Olam, which is often translated as
the world.
Repairing the world. Okay, we're going to actually mess with that definition, but that's true. That's how it's usually advertised in Tikkun Olam programs or Tikkun Olam initiatives. And Tzelem Elokim, which is usually translated as the image of God, which we are also going to probe very deeply over the next 4 weeks. So the two starting points for me, or the two kind of experiences that led me to create this class for you, one, as I said, is the 5 years that I've been teaching Breshit here with 12th graders. And we spend the whole year reading through the first 12, sometimes 13 chapters of Breshit. And what we find ourselves occupied with the entire year is this notion of what it means to be a human being. And the students are really surprised that this is what Breshit is about. In their memory, Breshit is a bunch of stories that may or may not relate to them. They're usually stories that are more connected to the people that they've come to venerate. They remember sort of loosely that we are learning about the creation of the world, but they're very surprised to find each year that Breshit is really speaking to them and giving them sort of mixed advice about what it means to live a full human life. So I want to bring some of those conversations and some of those sources that we've been discussing in Breshit class. The second point of entry for me into this class, and really the reason why I organized this particular packet that you have in front of me, was last summer I had the opportunity to speak at a conference that was devoted to the topic of Tikkun Olam. And it was mostly liberal Jews who were coming to this conference. And I asked myself in preparing this, multiple hour class, why do people still want to talk about Tikkun Olam? Like, it just seems like it's been out there for so long. It's an overused phrase. Those people who are heavily involved in Tikkun Olam work see it in one kind of way. I'm making a generalization that in the Orthodox community, Tikkun Olam is not usually one of our banners of what Judaism means for us or what engaged Jewish life is about. And I wanted to really probe a little bit further what bothers me about the Tikkun Olam phrase, or what felt a little bit problematic or perhaps empty or overused about Tikkun Olam, and also to ask why it doesn't really show up in our community. Go ahead.
Well, Tikkun Olam, from the Orthodox viewpoint, is a Kabbalistic concept that we have to do the mitzvahs, so that way we'll get to the Messiah.
That's true.
And so that's what Tikkun Olam has been sort of like bastardized by the Reform to say to fix the world.
Right.
It's not.
Right.
It's fixing
Right.
the world, but
Right.
a completely different
Right.
concept of fixing the
Good.
world.
So one question that I had is about the word Tikkun Olam, but also I guess the further question is why social justice, which is, right, how Tikkun Olam is Judaicized. Why is social justice not as much a part of our conversation in the Orthodox community? So here was my question that I posed at the beginning. Hi, Wendy. The question that I posed at the beginning was, again, my impression in the liberal community is that Tikkun Olam, which is laudable, okay, and spending time really investing and figuring out what are the social ills that plague not just the Jewish community, more often it's the larger community, and spending time and effort and seeing that as a means of creating a meaningful Jewish life, right? Yafeh ma'od, I have no judgment present, but the question I was asking was, what is the relationship between Tikkun Olam, which feels very outside and big and macro, and really thinking about what's going on the inside, spiritually? When Tikkun Olam becomes, as it seems, again, generalization, but it becomes the be-all and end-all of what it means to live a Jewish life, right? It's looking so much at the macro that you almost don't have to look at the micro. And it can become, or it seems to me, a bit of an excuse to really not think about spiritually where I am engaged. More importantly for our purposes, the other side of the critique, which I brought to this conference almost bearing it with my community, but it wasn't really shared by the people in front of me, was that in our community, I think, when we talk about what it means to reinvigorate our religious practice. And I'm thinking now specifically about the time that we're coming up towards in a few months, Elul and Tishrei, when our rabbis and teachers speak to us and try to inspire us to say, okay, this year I'm going to work on, right, religious growth. The items that are in the list that follows of that religious growth are, generally speaking, tefillah, limud, right? Maybe tzedakah, and think even of the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur liturgy. When we say we're going to reinvest ourselves religiously, what doesn't appear on that list is ethical conduct. And I've started to wonder about that, and if, when we don't use religious language to talk about ethical encounters, are we missing out on a big piece of what it means to be a religious Jew? Now let me just backtrack, because I can already imagine your critique. I'm not suggesting by any means that in the Orthodox community we don't do a good job of taking care of each other and really reaching out. It's part and parcel of what we do, right? In any shul, you will see, a committee that we often start to not even appreciate. We take for granted that we cook for each other and we visit each other, and that Bikur Cholim and right is so part of what it means to be a part of the community. And yet, when we talk about religious growth, we don't talk about encouraging our kids or our community members to go and spend some time this year sitting with somebody who's in the hospital, really sitting with them. Or challenge yourself this year to really figure out how you can help a child who's really struggling. You will grow religiously from that encounter. So that's what I think is missing in our community. And if we see the double critique, the liberal community, tikkun olam is the end-all and be-all, the macro which sacrifices the micro. Go ahead.
That tikkun within our community.
What do you
Would
mean?
be my understanding that their definition of tikkun olam is actually engaging in the larger world.
In the larger world, and not paying as much attention to the Jewish world. Is that what you mean?
Even if it's outside of oneself,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think an average Reformed person would say tikkun olam means visiting another Jew in the hospital.
Correct, and that's a question that I would say many Jewish organizations really try to, Wendy, chime in, because Wendy teaches at HUC. Let me just finish my sentence, then you can correct. But the question of resource allocation and focal points. So if you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, or you really want to think more widely, who do I take care of first? Right? When we talk about social justice, we're really talking about the whole system. So I got to look at wherever it's happening, not necessarily within the Jewish community. But what happens?
Social justice and tikkun olam are linked.
Yes.
And more people who are non-traditional would link them and say, let's put our efforts into being engaged in the whole world. We're a light unto the nation. We should be engaged with racism and inequality, blah, 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 not visiting a Jew in the hospital.
Yeah. You had to go ahead. What were you going to say?
I don't see that as a fair generalization. I think a lot of this comes down to the Reform community's desire at a certain point in its development to find that which was irreducibly true about Judaism, since they found some of the ritual laws to be antiquated and irrelevant to them, and especially apropos of Tzelem Elohim. So they want to identify the highest, most immutable values, that which they connect to God, and build on that. They wouldn't exclude visiting another Jew. I mean, there's so much discussion about pastoral behavior and kindness and charity and so on, but and with religious language, with sacred, the word sacred constantly being attended to. So.
Okay, so
let's just let us not collapse.
This is a hot button issue, and it's always dangerous to make generalizations. I was sharing this because this was my starting point for creating this class, which for today's purposes is for us, whoever we are and however we see ourselves. I want to think really not about critique of the other. It's so safe and easy, actually, to critique other people's practices. It's much harder to look inward and think about, okay, what are we doing about this? Where do these categories resonate with us? And I'm really challenged by, Wendy, what I see going on in the liberal community, and again, asking, why don't we ever talk about Tikkun Olam, and why don't we ever talk about Tzelem Elohim? The Tzelem Elohim phrase and text is, I would say, an overused widely upplayed text in liberal community and sorely underplayed in the Orthodox community. So what's that about, and what does it mean, and how does it play out in our community, and how might it play out in our community? So let's start doing some learning, okay, and then we'll come back to the meta issues. So the focus of, again, the next 4 classes is going to be really Breshit, and looking how Breshit in the first 12 chapters, or more succinctly 11 chapters, play out this question of what it means to live a full human life, where the inner and the outer intersect. And I'm going to use this term a lot, the vertical axis and the horizontal axis. The vertical axis can be defined as either, self and God, or really just self, inner self. And I'm so happy we have a psychologist here to help us with that inner self conversation. And then the horizontal plane, which is really the ethical plane. How do the vertical axis and the horizontal axis intersect? How do we create balance between those axes? And how does Breshit play out for us the fundamental tension between those 2 axes? Okay, so those are like the big questions that we're going to be engaging with. The first text is the first text, and that's Breshit, Parak Aleph. You have in your source sheet the Hebrew and the English. I'm going to be looking at the Hebrew. Please feel free to be following along in the English. It's fairly clear where the psukim match up. So Breshit, Parak Aleph, if you look at it in either language, and we're not going to read everything except for the end, but you can tell even by the spacing something right away. And we know it liturgically when we read it on Simchat Torah, that Parak Aleph is a highly stylized, regularized parak. You know where to stop. You know where to pause, right? And that is when it says, Vaye'arev vayevoker, right? Yom Achad, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. This is the first day, the second day, the third day. You have a natural place where the text is screaming out to you, okay, stop. You also see in Parak Aleph, besides the division by days, and by the way, how many days are in Parak Aleph? Your instinct
6.
would be, oh good, you know more, but the instinct would be 7, and when you look more closely, you see actually the 7th day Shabbat is in chapter 2. So 6 days are in Parak Aleph. In addition to the division by day, there are repeating verbs over and over and over. There's a repeating structure. Whenever God creates something, generally speaking, one thing is created per day, but some days have multiple, more than one. The text will always say, and God said, Vayomer Elokim, let the following thing be created. And then the text reports back, that thing was created. So again, you can imagine, it's great. We start the year this way. The kids are a little rusty from learning Tanakh over the summer, and it's very easy to follow. You know what's coming next. If you fall asleep for a minute, the next day you follow right back, you know where to find yourself. Vayomer Elokim, let the following that happen, and then the text reports that it happens. In almost every day, with 2 exceptions, or really 1.5 exceptions, after the thing is created, what happens? And it was good, right? That God evaluates, Vayar Elokim, and seeing is knowing here, right? Or seeing is taking stock of. Vayar Elokim Kitov. And right away we ask the question, what does that even mean, right? What was the other option? That God was going to create something that wasn't good? For whom is God making that evaluation, right? And what is the substance, what is the definition of that word Kitov? That question becomes more pertinent when you notice the days where Tov is missing. So what does that tell you about? Was that a flawed creation, right? It doesn't say Vayar Elokim ki lo tov, right, or ki ra, but what does it mean when the Tov is absent? All of these questions become more interesting when you look at day 6. Okay, and we're very familiar. This is a challenge, by the way, reading a familiar text. We're going to try to defamiliarize ourselves so we can ask new questions about a text we know very well. So if you look with me in day 6, again in the Hebrew Pasuk Chav Daled, the first thing that happens is not the creation of human beings, but the creation of land animals. And Pasuk Chav Daled we have, just as we would expect, Vayomer Elokim, God says, Totze haaretz nefesh chaya lamina, let the land bring forth, right, all these living beings, Vayhi chen. And Pasuk Chav Hei, Vayas Elokim, and there's the telling of the actual doing. God made the chayot, and at the end of that pasuk, Vayar Elokim Kitov. Part A of day 6. And then just scanning from Pasuk Chavav till the end, you notice what's left is all about the creation of man, and it's much lengthier than certainly part A of day 6, and it's much lengthier than any other thing that was created in the rest of Perek Aleph. Length doesn't always mean better, but it tells you something. There's more information about the creation of human beings than there was about anything else. Pasuk Chavav, and now we're going to read all the words. Vayomer Elokim, Na'aseh Adam betzalmenu kidmutenu, v'yirdu bidgat hayam uva'of hashamayim, uva behema uva'chol haaretz uva'chol haremes haromes al haaretz. Vayomer Elokim, as per the structure, God said, and now the first change that we noticed is what? Plural. So there's two problems. One, it's instead of let the following thing happen, now it is reflexive, let us. Not just let I, but let us. So why the change in the tense instead of tzivui to reflexive? And secondly, who's the we? Right, now that's an old question. It's actually a question that bothered ancient and medieval readers of Tanakh more than it bothers us. I always work hard to get the kids excited about that, and frankly, they're not that bothered by it. All right, so God's speaking in the plural. God speaks in lots of ways. Na'aseh, and you're probably familiar with some of the ancient answers, is God is speaking to the angels, or the Ramban says cleverly, God is speaking to the Aretz, so to speak, or speaking about the Aretz, right? Ani v'ha'aretz, there's a part of human beings that will be land-like, and there's a part of human beings that will be celestial-like, right? That's actually chapter 2, the two parts of man. Okay, so God says, let us make this man in our image, in our likeness. And this man, v'yirdu, but notice, by the way, it's v'yirdu is plural, right? So they will rule over essentially everything that has been created up until now. Vayivra Elokim et ha'adam b'tzalmo. The word vayivra, which is only mentioned one other time in this chapter, in that form, vayivra, you would have expected, right? What does vayivra mean? He created. You would have thought that was every single pasuk, but it's not. It's a special word. God created the Adam in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Zachar unekeva bara otam. Male and female, he created them. We'll come back to that pasuk in a moment. And after the speech act of let the thing be created, and then the description of it being created, we get something extra at the end. Vayivarech otam Elokim, vayomer lahem Elokim, pru urevu umilu et haaretz v'chivshuha, uredu bidgat hayam uva'of hashamayim uva'chol chaya haromeset al haaretz. Vayivarech, God blesses them, and he says to them, you should be fruitful and multiply and fill the Aretz and conquer it and take control over, again, everything that has been created up until now. So God reveals to human beings in that pasuk that which God said to God's self earlier, right? Na'aseh Adam, who will accomplish this particular task. And then in Chavtet, God turns again to human beings and says to them, Hinei natati lachem et kol esev zorei azera asher al pnei chol haaretz ve'et kol ha'etz asher bo pri etz zorei azara lachem yihiyeh lo'ochla. After blessing them and telling them what their task will be, what does he tell them? Here is what you get to eat. I am giving you all of that which grows, all of vegetation. For you it will be for food. And Pasuk Lamed, we find out what the students always misunderstand. I'll tell you what they say in a minute. Ulechol chayat haaretz ulechol of hashamayim. And with regard to all the land animals, they also will eat Yerek Esev. They all think that Pasuk is where they're saying, you can eat the meat, you can eat the animals. That doesn't come till later. Right? In Perek Aleph, human beings were intended to be vegetarians. And so, think of it. All these psukim are kind of heaping on how different human beings are. And we'll go back and return to those phrases in a moment. At the very end, the last pasuk actually says, well, there's one thing in which you are on equal plane. You are going to eat the same thing that all the animals are going to eat. And then, pasuk lamed aleph, Vayar Elokim et kol asher asa, v'hinei tov me'od, vay'erev vayivoker yom hashishi. Let's just read that pasuk carefully. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Vayerev Vayivoker, the sixth day. Now, reading it in a kind of surface way, you would say, oh, what did God do after God created man? He said that man was good. Just as at the end of every other creation, God looked and evaluated and said, that was good. Why not, Sima?
Because it's not specific to man. Is that, I guess I was aware of it because I was thinking of the story of the flood. So in some way, God did not acknowledge that he says everything was very good, which I guess includes man.
Good. Okay.
It's not a
So
specific
so
word.
good. The technical answer is God saw everything and evaluated that everything was good, but you're right to notice that man does not get a specific evaluation. Everything else, right, which got a specific evaluation, with the exception of the Shamayim, which we're going to come back to in a moment. And then there's a general one at the end, but man does not get its own Vayar Elokim Kitov. Okay, let's pull together, I don't have a board, but let's pull together all the different features that we've noticed so far. And again, reading familiar text in a new way. What do you notice about human beings? What do you notice about the relationship between God and human beings? What do you notice about the relationship between human beings? If this was all you got, okay, if this was the whole blueprint for what it meant to be a human being living in God's world, tell me what you could deduce from these psukim, and maybe be specific about which words or phrase makes you think that.
Maybe that in the image of God is unique to man.
Okay. Okay, so what does that mean to you, Malka?
That it's different than anything he said before.
Okay, so even to the most basic level, we could say nothing else, and you know this
Nothing
from
else.
prior readings, nothing else is made in the image of God. It's outside of God. It's connected to the land or it's connected to the sky, but human beings are the only ones who get that uniquely, that different kind of phrase. We don't know what it means, right? There's lots of possibilities. The kind of knee-jerk response would be to say, well, we kind of look like God. Image makes me think of image, likeness, looking like God. We know we're too philosophical to believe that, right? And we look at each other and we know that's impossible. We can't possibly look like God. So we need something else to explain the image of God. What else do you notice?
So it seems, at least if you're just plain text meaning, the image of God is to exercise dominion over other things. That was the plan, Nasa, between, and it, as if to amplify that, it says, Urdu b'gatayam, and so on and so forth. And then when they're created, again, that's reiterated. So the way that God dominates and presides over, as human beings dominate and preside over.
Okay, good. So Wendy's pulling something out from Pasuk Chavav. It's not so easy in Chav Zayin, okay? But in Chavav, Wendy's saying the first time that Tselem Elokim is introduced, it's linked to the phrase which immediately, perhaps we can read it as a modifier of or an expander on that term. What does it mean to be in the image of God? Well, rule over the world. Just as perhaps God implicitly rules over the world in the rest of Perek Aleph, right? Now we find out, welcome. Now we find out that human beings have am I adding to what you said or echoing? Human beings have a similar job, which is to rule over the creatures in the world.
And they're expressly given that instruction. So the thing that you noticed was a repetition. In other words, God said it to God's self, and then God gives the directive. They're told and blessed in this to be fruitful. But of course, all the animals have fertility, so fruitful for the purpose, it would seem, of filling and exercising dominion.
Okay, actually, that's really interesting, and we're going to come back to that. Is that why we're here, right? Or are they separate? Is Pruervu one thing? Our job is to multiply and fill up the earth, and then our second job, perhaps, or as Wendy said, the overarching job is to take charge, right? Now, let me ask you something else. When you read these psukim, does it seem as if, like in Wendy's reading, God creates human beings in order to continue the work that he's doing already, right? Another more radical read is to say, well, God created the world, and then in day 6, part B, creates human beings and sort of says, all right, it's yours now. I'm out. You are Tselem Elokim. You have the job that I have maintained up until now. And I'm giving you all the elements. All you really need is actually the implicit, invisible other. there's got to be two of you, and in Perek Aleph, human beings, man and woman, male and female, are created at the same exact time, right, which we have to unpack a little bit further. But you need each other. You make babies. You take charge. The world is yours. Different relationship between God and human beings. Human beings then are sort of almost like mini gods. Okay, that's radical. Malka doesn't like it. Why not?
No, I do. I just, maybe I'm picking on something dumb, but I would tend to think when it says rule the fish, the birds, that, and the living things, I have no idea what rule above means and rule a trout means. So I think, oh, maybe that means we can eat them. And then the next pasuk is, and I'm giving you trees to eat. So it doesn't mean to eat them. What does it mean to dominate over bugs and birds
Wonderful,
and fish?
wonderful. Good. Okay, that's a great question, right? And I think you're very right to point out, especially today, we read this differently with our environmental awareness, right? What are our interactions with animals living in suburbia, first of all, are quite limited. So the only way in which we mostly encounter animals is either by getting them out of our houses, well, unless you have a pet, which I don't have, but trying to get rid of them. I just hired an exterminator 2 days ago. Or eating them, or perhaps looking at them from afar. None of those feel like taking control over, mastery. What does that even mean? Is it specific to animals? Okay, in which case I need to play out what that looks like. Are the animals kind of the representative of the whole created world up until now? And God is saying to human beings, your job is now to be somehow masters of this space, inclusive of everything in it. Still, that doesn't help me understand, what do I do? What do I do? How do I exert my mastery? What do you want from me? How do I do this? I can't eat them. What do I do for them, with them, right? What am I modeling? If this was a kind of a job description for a counselor in a sleepaway camp, like take control of the kids, like what do I do next? Okay, so we're identifying one problem, which is this mastery question, which seems at first blush to be very obvious. Human beings are the climax of the world. They seem to have the most kochot. They're unique. Tzelem Elokim. More deeper look, what does that really mean? How does that play out? What about the relationship? Can we go back to the relationship between human beings? The ethical encounter here in chapter 1. What do you learn about the relationship between people? What are the expectations? Or what is the imagined relationship that's implicit in these psukim?
Well, I found it sort of strange because, first of all, mankind is the only one that specifically says male and female.
Mm-hmm.
So there are only two, and none of that is here. And God has to say to them, be fertile and increase. So it's kind of like either they don't need any more animals, God made enough, or the animals understand how to propagate, and men and women, man and male and female have to be told what to do. So there's already a sense of their distinction. It's not natural, it has to be learned, so there has to be some kind of relationship between these two different human beings that just doesn't appear anywhere else.
Okay, good. Actually, just to be sure, in the day before, in day 5, fishes and birds are given a similar command. This is in verse 22, right? And that's all right. But you're right to point out that, first of all, it's not mentioned in part A of day 6. So land animals don't get that. And there is something, even you could ask it about animals too. What does it mean to be blessed that you will propagate? It doesn't seem like a commandment. You're also right to point out that we typically think of procreation as just a product of a natural impulse. So what does it really mean to say to people, this is what's expected of you, or this is what I'm blessing you that you'll be able to do? You were suggesting that there's almost like an awkwardness or a lack of understanding between these two parties that are suddenly in the world together. What are we supposed to do with each other? So they're being taught or told that at least one expectation is that they're going to further the human race together. What else could you say about, I heard the word distinctness or kind of separateness. What do you learn about the relationship between, right, in a kind of almost clinical sense, zachar u'nekeva, right, male and female, What do you learn about their relationship from these sparse psukim, or their responsibility to each other?
Well, they're obviously equal.
How do you know that?
He created them together.
You don't know anything except to be fruitful and multiply.
Well,
That's
no,
all
but you
really
do know
know.
what you but look at verse 27, Rechav Zayin, right? Now, let's read this again, okay? Because this is loaded and there's lots to say about it, and we're going to come back to it. But I love Malka's instinct is like, no, it's so clear right here. It says it, right? Vayivra Elokim et ha'adam betzamo. Again, if I had a board, picture each of those phrases one on top of the other. So the first one is, God created the Adam. This is not, it's an undifferentiated male, okay? This is not that God created the Zachar betzamot, ha'adam, in his image. Next phrase, which is really saying the same thing. B'tzelem Elokim bara oto. Right? Didn't say Tzelem Elokim before, it said Salmo. In the image of God, God created it. So logically, the it refers to
Humanity.
ha'adam. Right, same part in phrase A. Then comes phrase number 3, Zachar unekeva bara otam. Male and female, he created them. So there's always somebody in the class in 12th grade who will say, it's very clear that man is created b'tzelem Elokim and female is not created b'tzelem Elokim, right? Now, have you heard this reading? Right?
It's the Barbanel.
Okay, but if you stack the 3 phrases, right, and you see, and again, I can bring you texts that commentators that flesh this out more clearly, the oto and the otam and the ha'adam occupy the same space in the phrase. And what seems to be, and again, as feminists, we like this reading, but what seems to be clear as day in this pasuk is that the zachar nekeva, right, the differentiation between male and female, is part and parcel of the tzelem Elokim, of ha'adam, right? And it is one. Now, how does that work out? There's lots of fantastical, right? And we'll look at some of those that the Midrash, that Ramban picks up, that somehow this was a two-faced, right? But even if we don't get technical, what gender doesn't have a meaningful doesn't have a meaningful distinction in this para. Actually, what's emphasized is that there are 2, that is 1. There's a likeness, they're apart and they're together, and both together comprise Tzelem Elokim. So Wendy, almost what you were saying before, that I would define Tzelem Elokim as V'yirdu b'tgat hayam, you could also imagine that somebody would say, well, I know what Tzelem Elokim is. Tzelem Elokim is 2 genders together. We don't hear about other animals, but of course all other animals have male and female. It's not mentioned, it's not important, it's not a thing that's on the table. For human beings, the fact that 2 genders can figure out how to cooperate and work together and create a society, and both together, and only both together, reflect on the divinity. Maybe that's Tzelem Elokim. Maybe not in isolation of the first, maybe together. Any other evidence we have for how human beings are supposed to treat each other, or the responsibility they have for each other, or the job that they co-share? Right, the they, that is them, that is it.
Pru'urvu is for both.
Pru'urvu is for both, okay.
And the luing the parrots, it's in the plural.
Mm-hmm.
They're co-custodians of food consumption
Right.
and production.
Right? Hine natati lachem. It's for both of you. There's no distinction there. Right? And I guess we could say similarly to how Malka pointed out that the ruling over the earth, or the mastery over everyone else, it seems to be very clear, but the details are really missing. We could say the same thing here, that the fundamental principles of ethical responsibility, or ethical encounter, or ethical, and by ethical I mean, person to person, are front and center, going back to Tzelem Elokim. But how you're supposed to really behave, and how you're supposed to really do this work together, and be co-custodians, and take care of each other, is really not spelled out in chapter 1. Right? Finally, we could say the same thing about the relationship between God and human beings. Very clear, or at least one strong possibility, is that we are, in some sense, a representative of the divine. We are, right, the continuation of the divine role in the world. But how we're supposed to relate to God, or how we later, what we will call serve God, is really not spelled out in Perek Aleph. So when we come, go ahead.
So actually, one of the things that certainly struck me looking at this is what mastery might be is actually living in this natural world, because it's not a foregone conclusion that you could do that so easily with all the bugs and the animals. Like they could eat you and infect you and all. I mean, human beings have to learn how to master that and somehow stay alive, even though they don't necessarily have all the natural advantages that some other animals might be.
Well, that's
might have them. They don't even, at this point, they don't have any clothes.
Right.
I mean, they have,
So almost maybe what you're saying is, in a sense, learning how to do your part, which is pru uvumi lu ta'aret, while living in this crazy, right, buzzing natural universe.
in a sense, create a civilization that is the only way that human beings have been able to demonstrate mastery. It's not because we have any physical advantage over many of the other natural creatures. In fact, little things can fell us,
Right.
in addition to big ones.
Right. So it's
And
interesting.
nature.
So the viyurdu, the subjugation of the control, is a very strong hint towards the conflicts and the struggles of being a master. Meaning, it sounds so nice. You're created last. You're the pinnacle. You're the climax. You're the most like God. Go.
Mortality rate's really high.
Right, but actually what's implicit in this is that this is going to be very hard to do. And in fact, what you were just saying initially, Wendy, made me think maybe
We're not
what we
cracking
do
up.
today is not real. We're not living in the world, you know, and look at this. We got the windows. We feel like we're outside. We're not. We're very enclosed. I call it the exterminator, right? I haven't figured out maybe how to really live in the natural world as a human being, right? So that contest or that conflict between being a human being in its fullness and living as part of, in the world, not above and beyond, but in the world, could be part of what our task is.
Have you seen Jungle Book?
No.
So there's a new Jungle Book that came out.
Yeah.
So this human is living with all these animals and being encouraged all the time in order to blend in with the animals, not to exercise any kind of ingenuity, because that would set him apart. And in fact, you know, the message is you have that's in the nature, the distinctive nature of human beings, to figure out how to crack the nut or how to get up to the high place that you don't naturally have the ability to get to.
Yeah.
I do notice that he says master rule the fish, the birds, and everything that creeps, but he doesn't give us to rule the cattle and beasts of every kind. That's, in other words, when he created in the sixth day, he created creatures, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind. So the cattle and wild beasts are not included in the creeping things.
Well, which verse are you looking at? 28?
Yeah, in other words,
Because in 28, right, when it says,
in 24, let the earth before they go to living creatures, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts. Now, when he tells us to rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on the earth, it's the creeping things that we control, but we don't seem to control the cattle.
No, the
and
cattle's
wild
in there.
animals.
The
cattle.
yeah, the
Wild
cattle's in
animals.
there in verse 26. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things. What's missing, you're right, is the wild beasts. They're not mentioned again. Take a look.
Because we rule cows and horses and not lions.
Right. Well, that's a question. Is it talking about domestication of animals? Or is it talking about somehow...
Yeah, he put a comment.
So
Right.
is it giving us a subtle message, continuing with your thought, that I'm giving you this earth and life has inherent challenges and conflict and always will. That you will have to develop a mastery to manage life. Some of it will be about food, some of it will be danger. I am creating a world that is not perfect, and you should know at the outset that you will always have large or small challenges and conflicts to lead out.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, in this aspirational moment, right? In this original moment, there's already implicit an awareness that this
Life
job,
will be
this job is about, right? And I love it that it's so subtle. You really have to sit with it to see the conflict, because again, and one of the things I talk about with my students all year is there's the second grade reading of Breshit and there's the 12th grade and beyond reading. And the second grade reading, it's all very orderly and it all works out, and you can make a diorama or you can make a pie chart or any which way you can find how all the days really match up and are right, somehow relating to each other and human beings at the end. But on further read, there's already this sense, right, that being a human being is really hard work. And again, to relate to the ethical, the relational, to be in a relationship with another person, right, where there's a sameness and a likeness and equality, and yet a difference, is enough on its own before we throw in the lions and the creepy crawlies. Right, so we've got 3 things that we have to work on already in Perek Aleph. We need to figure out how to relate to the other human beings in our universe. We need to figure out how to relate to all the other creatures in the natural world. And we need to work out what it means to be a reflection and a representative of the divine. Is that an active thing that's expected of us? Or is that sort of telling us, this is who you are, now go? Or do we need to reflect back somehow to God? You know, one insight that I had yesterday that I wanted to share with you, and again, we're going to probe this phrase quite a bit more, this Tselem Elokim. But if in fact, in Perek Aleph, we are described as being created in the image of God, what it really means in Breshit is that human beings are trying to figure out who God is through figuring out who they are. Meaning, we normally think about the image of God in a sense of anthropology. We learn who we ought to be from that sense. If God is, right, we think God is static, and then we are trying to act like God. We're trying to be the ones who bring order. We're the ones who are trying to take care and nurture, right? We need to actualize this sense of being created like God. But the way that it's presented in Breshit goes both ways. We learn who God is through learning who we are. What we're going to see over the next few classes is that human beings in Breshit, and of course it doesn't end with Breshit, we're still involved in that, we, through life, I believe, come into a greater understanding of the self. Hopefully, if things go well. At the same time, we grow into a greater understanding of who God is in our life. And so Tselem Elokim is like a portal with 2 openings. Right? Neither piece is closed. God is not closed, and we are not closed. Okay, that was a big thought. We'll come back to it. Take a look at the next source. Okay, we're moving away from Breshit, which we'll come back to shortly. I'm going to kind of switch gears for a moment way ahead to the Mishnah. And this, again, is a familiar Mishnah. And it's taught, pieces of it are often on plaques in our shuls and elsewhere. And what the Mishnah here really makes very, very clear and very bolate, very strong, what we said in a subtle sense in Perek Aleph, that human beings are the pinnacle of the world, or human beings are, in a sense, a representative of God in the world, the Mishnah says very clearly that human beings, each human being, is the whole world. Let me show you what I mean. This Mishnah comes in Sanhedrin, where the Mishnah is describing the process by which a witness, a potential witness, would go through before they could actually provide testimony in a potential murder case. And the Mishnah says, how would you, Ketzad ma'ayimin, it's not in your sheet, et ha'idim, how would you kind of scare the hell out of the witnesses before they would come forward and decide, okay, I'm going to give testimony? And there's a whole long list, which seems like a composite of different speeches that would be given to these potential witnesses. And one of the speeches is as follows. For this reason, the human race was first created as one individual. Or in the Hebrew, Lefichach nivra Adam yichidi. Why were human beings created as one? We know one that already has a doubling, but ha-Adam. Why singularly? To teach you that whoever destroys a single soul, Scripture imputes guilt to him as though he had destroyed a complete world. And whoever preserves a single soul, Scripture ascribes merit to him as though he had preserved a complete world. Stop there. Meaning, if a person were to give testimony in a murder case, and their testimony would be accepted, that person would be put to death. what the Beit Din was saying to this person who came forth to be a witness, you better be really sure that you are not coming here with any other motives, that you didn't sort of see it, kind of see it, that you don't have a reason to put that person through capital punishment. You better be sure that your testimony is valid because somebody's life is on the table. And if somebody's life is taken for no good reason, right? And again, you could ask the question, why are we even allowed to enforce a capital punishment? We're allowed perhaps to enforce capital punishment because if somebody has murdered another human being, they have, in a sense, forfeited, right, their own Tselem Elokim. They no longer see themselves or live in the world as a representative of the divine, and or they didn't see the Tselem Elokim of the person that they killed. So you, as a force, as a court, you're allowed to then say, okay, this person, now we can take his life. But the Beit Din are saying to these people, you have to be sure that your testimony is valid because one person, right? One person is a whole world. So it's real. It's not just a metaphor, right? It's real. Now, every time I read this text, I sort of feel this terror of responsibility, right? As a teacher, as a mother, right? And now we're not talking about only capital punishments. Each person that comes before you is a whole world, right? Each person that you have a chance to educate or you have a chance to help guide or to nurture is a whole world. And we know that in a kind of like physical sense, this person could have many descendants. And we know that even without the Pruervu, this person, right? And again, in psychology, each person is a whole world. Take a look at the next source, and then we'll bring them both together. Rabbi Simcha Bunim of, I don't know how to pronounce that, Przusza, 1765 to 1827, leader of the Hasidic world in Poland. And he says, our master taught, every person should have two pockets. In one pocket should be a piece of paper saying, Ani afar ve'efer, I am but dust and ashes. In the other pocket should be a piece of paper saying, for my sake was the world created. Bishvili nivra ha'olam. You heard this phrase? Okay. Every time, again, I read this, I see something different in it. So what do you hear in this phrase? What is he saying to you? Why should you have these two notes in each pocket? Very low-tech, non-digital way of keeping yourself rooted. In each pocket, one phrase. Let's take each phrase by itself. Ani afar va'efer. I am but dust and ashes.
Humility.
Okay, that's easy. Humility. Now, Wendy, if you say humility, right, positive, negative, neutral, what is it?
No, I mean, it's abject humility because you're nothing. But then if you have an attitude of nothingness, then you'll do nothing. So you have straddle these two poles of being utterly abject, humble, and being super abundantly confident.
Okay. So anyone, Wendy's saying anyone on their own, well, we didn't even go to the second one, presumably, anyone on their own are out of bounds. Right? If you had only, in both pockets, you had a niafar ve'efer, humility on its own sounds like a good thing, and we all need to do a better job, probably, of cultivating some humility. But abject humility, I am nothingness, right? A niafar ve'efer could mean, right, we know, we didn't even see in chapter 2, but in chapter 2, human beings are not described as being created in the image of God, but are described as coming from the earth. And we all know where we're going. And so if a niafar ve'efer is your organizing framework for your life, both endpoints are fully in view all the time. And what's the point? What's the motivator? Why should I ever do anything? Why should I look for change in my life, right? I'm going back to the place that I came, and that's actually the totality of my existence, is the dust. If that was how you saw yourself, what would your life be? Paralysis. On the other hand, bishvili nivra ha'olam. So if Wendy said humility and then modified it to abject humility for the first one, what would be your catchphrase for my sake was the world created? Grandiosity. Okay. Now, let's see. Self-importance, right? And typically, both of those words, or arrogance, we would say those are negative. But
Say to be an example.
What do you
To
mean?
be an example to the world. How being created in the image of Hashem should be.
So that's positive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's positive, not negative.
Not negative.
Okay. So
Well, you could look at it and say, since you have importance,
And you're here for a short period of time because you're going to be dust and ashes soon. And you're very important while you're here. Fulfill your mandate of being an extension of God, because you're not forever like God, but while you're here, you could be godlike, and you've got a time limit to do that.
Okay, so that sounds tempered. That sounds more similar to what you're saying. But let's say we take it to the abject sense, right? What happens if that's the only note you have, or it's taken in extreme, right? Bishvili nivra ha'olam, with nothing to balance it. The whole world is mine. I mean, we know who in the media thinks that way, right? Unchecked sense of self with nothing getting in the way, right? That leads to untold aggression. I think that's yours. No. That leads to, right, a total disregard for anybody, forget the animals, right, for other human beings. It's all about me, for my sake. Everything here is for me. In a more tempered sense, right, again, especially if counterposed with the ani afar ve'efer, what motivates you to get past your own mortality? The sense that there's potential. You can do something. Right? Not just as if for me, but I can bring something. That was how you put it. I can be the model. I can be the dugma ishit. I can actually be a mirror for the world of what it means to be created in the image of God. The genius of this phrase is that, right, either one in isolation doesn't work, doesn't allow you to live a full human life. It's striking that balance between those two, which is the whole task that we have.
It's interesting how this is, this is a kind of midrash on the Mishnah.
Yes.
That it's taking, it has this polar language of dust and ashes and grandiosity, in the same way that Mishnah and Sanhedrin had me'abed and mekayem.
Nice. I was just about to ask you that. In what sense is this a midrash on that Mishnah, right? And you could also say, Wendy, and I'm curious what you think, right? When you say that a person is a whole world, and you're saying before the person who might be responsible for their life being taken, remember that person is a whole world. Are these two notes what's allowing you to see that? Or is it one or the other? Am I a whole world because bishvilini ra'olam? Or am I a whole world when I'm guided by those two? Is it contingent? Or are people, each person is just a whole world? Yeah, what did you
I
say?
think it's just a factor of life. Some days you're on top of the world, and other days everything's against you. And
Okay.
so one day it's one piece of the pocket, then later on it's the other thing, and you can't escape it. Nobody gets through the world without any problems, and sometimes you do good.
Nice.
So
Nice.
this is a reality check, not
Nice.
a...
Right, so he's not actually saying, right, I mean, because you should have these in your pockets. They should help you, remind
it's
you.
gonna
So
happen.
in your reading, it's a way
Sometimes
of...
this is going to happen.
Yeah, letting you
sometimes
know.
that's
It's a
gonna happen.
gamsuya for both ways.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Well,
right.
so getting back to your question
When you
about
all remember it's going to change,
Right.
vice versa.
your earlier question about how the creation story is guiding us about interpersonal relations, and the trick or the difficulty in being told to dominate is, what about human beings dominating one another, and how quickly that will we'll see that human beings begin to demonstrate that sort of behavior. So if you say, for my sake the world was created, then you would revel in being able to be me'abed lots of nefashot.
Right.
It clears the way for you.
Right. If it's all about me, right? The big problem of Tzelem Elokim, and thank you for reminding me, the big problem is that if you spend all your time thinking about how you are at Tzelem Elokim and thinking about your own balance, you're forgetting, conveniently, an important fact, which is that every other human being on this planet is also created at Tzelem Elokim. And so the real terror of embracing your own I am a full world is being able to balance that with the full acknowledgement that everybody else around you has that same gift and that same responsibility. Right? And Yitzhak Greenberg talks about this a lot, right? If we were to live our lives with a full awareness of both ours and everyone else's, right, divine spark or representation of God in the world, we would never be able to harm someone else or harm ourselves if we fully inhabited that, right? And that is a piece, again, of the challenge of Perek Aleph. Malka, you get the last comment.
This
Go ahead.
is weird, but if we look to God as a model of how to be, God doesn't treat everybody equally, and God has set up the world where some people are clearly at a distinct disadvantage. And it doesn't say other people shouldn't treat them well, but it's not as if we have as a model that you're all equal, for us to see at least, and we should all, therefore, as I created everyone in a fair way, model me. We see the opposite. We see some people are sickly and physically burdened and intellectually challenged. So, in a way, for those who wish to dominate, they could say, hey, God modeled that for us. We're not, it wasn't fair. It never was created fair.
Okay, that's a beautiful question, and I'm lucky that our time is up, and I'm going to come back to it, okay? Because you're raising an important question about the creation versus the maintenance, right? And the reality versus the aspiration. And where do we fit in that as human beings when we're modeling ourselves, and what the expectation is for us.
Yeah.
All right, thank you all so much. I look forward to next week. By the way, just to explain the reason why we shifted it, for some people the last 2 weeks were,
Yeah.
Yom HaShoah and Yom HaAtzmaut. It seems strange to have a class going on here when the rest of the school was in another zone. All right, if you want, I'm happy to take them and give them back to you next week. Or you could take it with you, whatever.
I made some notes on it.
Okay, so.